No place for Jews. Unlike like Italians, Russian Jews fled poverty. Unlike Italians, however, nature did not torment them with flood and fire. Their greatest threat was religious hatred. Ever since the ancient Romans had driven Jews from their homeland in Palestine, most had lived in the countries of Western Europe, England, Spain, France, Italy, the Netherlands, and the German lands. Good citizens, they obeyed the laws, paid their taxes, and prospered as merchants, traders, and artisans. Yet Christians often resented Jews because they held different religious beliefs. Resentment easily turned to hatred, and hatred to violence. In the early 1100s, Jews began to flee eastward in large numbers to Poland. Its kings welcomed them, not only from kindness, but because they had skills needed to develop the country. Russia was different. Poland's eastern neighbour banned Jews from its territory. Russians followed the Eastern Orthodox faith, a branch of Christianity. They despised Jews, calling them Christ killers. Poles because they were Roman Catholics, and Muslims because they were not Christians at all. When Jewish merchants came to trade, the Tsars or emperors warned them to stay away or die. They meant it. In the year 1563, soldiers drowned Jewish intruders on orders from Tsar Ivan the Terrible. In the late 1700s, Poland's stronger Russian, Austrian, and German neighbours forcibly partitioned or divided the country amongst themselves. Russia seized eastern Poland, the largest section, where the largest number of Jews also lived. Although the Tsars did not want Jews in their lands, they got them anyhow. So, when we discuss, we'll come back to this map, but notice this line, the Pale of Settlement here, on the western part of Russia. So when we discuss Russian Jews, we mean those who were originally Polish Jews. Poland would not regain its independence until 1918 at the end of the First World War. The Tsars, remember these are the emperors, decided to segregate or separate the Jews from Russians by creating the Pale of Settlement. Originally, the word pale meant fence or barrier, like paling. But instead of building a real fence, the Tsars separated the mainly Jewish areas from Russia proper by a line drawn on a map. The Pale of Settlement, Pale for short, held the territories along Russia's western border. It stretched from Russian-ruled Poland in the centre to the traditional Russian lands along the Baltic Sea in the north and the Black Sea in the south. Several thousand Jewish merchants and skilled artisans had special permission to live in Russian cities. The rest dared not leave the Pale or step beyond the Pale, for if the police caught them, the Tsar took all their property and sent them to prison. And beyond the Pale is still a phrase used today that means that's beyond the pale. That's worse than anyone thought it could be. Yeah, it's beyond the pale. By the year 1900, the Pale held 4.8 million Jews. And here is a picture of some of them. The Pale was dotted with hundreds of shtetls. Most Jews lived in a shtetl, the Yiddish word for small town. East European Jews often knew three languages. The first was Hebrew, the language of the Bible and prayer, but not a conversation. The second was the language of the country in which they lived and spoke to Gentiles, which could be German, it could be Russian. The third, Yiddish or Jewish German, was the language of everyday life. When Jews first came to Poland from Germany, they spoke the German language. Over time, German mixed with Hebrew, Polish, and Russian words forming Yiddish. And just a note about Yiddish, we use words, things like putz, schmuck, schmaltz. These are certainly in the United States we use a lot of Yiddish words because so many Polish and Russian Jews immigrated to this country. However, Yiddish is written in Hebrew characters from right to left, like Hebrew. A vivid language, it can express everything from joy to grief with power and emotion. All shtetls seemed cut from the same pattern. One looked much like another. A traveller described a shtetl as a jumble of wooden houses clustered higgledy-piggledy about a marketplace that served the Gentiles living in the countryside. Now, Gentiles is anyone who's not a Jew. Peasants brought their cows and chickens, hides and wool, timber and grain to market. Jewish merchants traded these for goods manufactured in cities: clothing, boots, lamps, pottery, cutlery, nails, tools. Also, the shtetl's own artisans kept small shops or worked out of their homes. Women played a key role in these activities. Wives not only ran the home, they and their daughters helped the menfolk earn a living. A traditional Yiddish marriage song mentions just a few of their duties. Cobblers' wives must make the thread, tailors' wives must sit up late, butchers' wives must carry the meat, weavers' wives must throw the spindle, filers' wives must turn the wheel, painters' wives must mix the paint, carpenters' wives must saw the boards. So we see, women not only did traditional women's work, but also helped with the work of their husbands. Despite the Jews' important economic role, Russians never let them forget they were outsiders. Russia was the only country where anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, was official government policy. Ordinary Russians, egged on by their rulers, spat out the word Žid, Jew, like a foul curse. No country persecuted Jews like Russia. Its laws limiting Jewish rights filled a book of nearly 1,000 pages. By the 1880s, Jews could not be army officers or judges or serve on juries. Not one Jew taught in the Russian school system or was a university professor. Only 1 in 10 high school or university students could be Jewish. The law banned Jews from owning land outside a shtetl, even for a graveyard, nor could they deal in oil, coal, or gold, or do business on Sundays. Jews who had received permission to live in Russian cities a century before had to return to the Pale, leaving their possessions behind. None of these limitations existed in England or other Western European countries. There, the career open to talent, the right to follow any calling and rise as high as one's abilities could go, was the law of the land, including in the United States. Many Jews, finding it impossible to earn a living in the shtetls, moved to slums in large cities within the Pale. They settled in cities most Americans had never heard of, places with strange-sounding names: Warsaw, Vilna, Lodz, Minsk, Grodno, Bialystok. But city jobs were scarce too. Many Jews were so poor, they said, half joking, they lived on air. Small wonder that Yiddish is rich in words for poverty and bad luck. One grammar book has 19 columns of word for misfortune. Yet there were worse things than poverty. In the name of keeping order, the Tsar's Cossacks, fierce horsemen, swept into shtetls to whip and loot, rape and burn. If anything went wrong, Russia's rulers made Jews scapegoats, those who bear the blame for the sins of others. Oppression on the back of a Jewish man. In bad economic times, for example, officials directed popular anger away from the government and toward the Jews. People unleashed their anger in pogroms, from a Russian word meaning riot or devastation. A pogrom, in effect, was a license to commit murder. In April 1903, around the time Sadie Frown saw the Statue of Liberty, the New York Times described a typical pogrom. There was a well-laid plan for the general massacre of Jews on the day following the Orthodox Easter, its reporter noted. The mob was led by priests, and the general cry, "Kill the Jews!" was taken up all over the city of Kishinev. The scenes of horror that attended this massacre are beyond description. Babes were literally torn to pieces by the frenzied and bloodthirsty mob. The local police made no attempt to check the reign of terror. Only after the massacre did the police step in to arrest Jews who had tried to defend their families by force. From 1903 to 1906, during the reign of Tsar Nicholas II, some 3,100 Jews lost their lives in pogroms. A single month, November 1905, saw no fewer than 600 pogroms, an average of 20 a day. It is not surprising that many Jews decided that Russia was no place for them. Uh-oh.